What's changed in the world since you were a kid? Me and my buddy kept ours in a plastic bag in the woods, but not deep. His street dead ended at the woods and there was a drop-off. You could actually reach up under the street, so we kept it there. Years later I went back and reached up and felt the bag. I was super excited that I was gonna find my early 90s stash. At some point a hole was formed and it all got wet. Nothing left but a pile of pulp. Once at Boy Scout camp, this was pre-internet, another guy threw a porno mag into the breakfast fire right in front of all of us. I guess the other kid he had to share his tent with would whack it in the night and he did not appreciate that, so was destroying said kid's magazine. I've never seen so many dudes simultaneously lunge into a full-on burning campfire and burn themselves. We got a special talking to about fire safety because of that. I graduated high school in 2011. I had a friend in elementary school. We hung out all the time from maybe grades 1-5, then kind of took different paths and fell apart in middle school. Never really talked much or had any classes together after that. He walked up to me on graduation day and recited my home telephone number by heart and he nailed it, lol. I once accidentally brought a pocket knife on a plane as a kid. I hopped through the metal detector because I was just being a weird kid and it beeped, but the guard didn't want to hold things up and make a clearly unruly child go through it again, so they just sent me on. I later realized on the plane while reaching in my pocket for something that I had my pocket knife in my pocket. I'd also say the ability to keep your life private independent of what you may choose to put out there. Like I just started a new job and in the orientation training video they mentioned that the company has a credit monitor on every employee, so if you get into debt they can flag you as being vulnerable to bribery to release trade secrets, or the employers who require you to carry a company-issued cell phone at all times, so they can track your location 24/7, or having to submit to pre-employment drug testing for jobs that don't involve safety or working with vulnerable populations. Like I shouldn't have to send my personal medical records to my employer to justify taking prescription medications that flag as dirty just to work in an office. But apparently being employed in modern America means ceding your right to keep your location, spending habits, and medical history private from the org cutting your paycheck. Also how much information companies have on you even without you purposely giving them the information. For example, cell phones constantly tracking your location. I try to be good about not putting tons of things out there on Facebook and such, but Google definitely has access to everything about me. Trying to be better with like switching to Firefox and DuckDuckGo, but it kinda feels like a losing battle. A positive one is the attitude towards people with dwarfism. When I was a kid, and up until my teens, there was no question, we were just seen as a complete joke. The go-to points of reference of us at the time were Mini-Me, Oompa Loompas and Munchkins. I got bullied and mocked constantly, and the notion of me having a relationship or any kind of romantic life, forget it. Unless it's for the punchline for a joke. I felt extremely depressed and hopeless when I was a kid when I started to fully realize how all this really dehumanizing treatment I would get would be a staple in my entire life. Fast forward to now and I feel like things have taken a shift, for the better, mostly thanks to representations like Tyrion Lannister from GOT. I can't overstate how much of an impact that has had on my life. Just from how different people now think about us and talk about us, I feel like I'm seen as more human now. There's still a long way to go and I still deal with a lot of shit, but I never thought things would actually change this much in my lifetime. Hopefully things continuing to change for the better. I will admit when I was younger that I would say things without thinking them through. It was never meant to be mean but more jokingly. Of course that is no excuse for my actions. I will say though my sister-in-law is on the shorter side, 5 foot, while I am taller, 6'5". And I tell her all the time people of all heights are needed when she gets frustrated. She can reach the items low down way easier than I can. And I can get the stuff up top. Teamwork makes the dream work. And remember how terrible the information was? We'd use a card catalog and find the book to check the index, only to find our source has one scant sentence on our subject. which we would postulate into an entire paragraph for our essay. Most of the information was incorrect anyway. Have you gone back and read what we thought we knew about the solar system in a World book from 1996? It's criminal. I was thinking a while back about how when I was a kid, if you wanted to learn how people lived in another country, you'd go to the library and read a book about how life was in Japan, and it would end 30 years ago, 9 times of 10. If you wanted a sense of how things were currently, or news from another country, you often had to read the language and hunt down a physically imported newspaper, or one made for immigrants. When I saw the stats about the decrease of insects population, I didn't have a hard time believing it. As a kid at my parents' place, I hardly could go outside in the evening without being covered in bug bites and seeing them fly almost in dark clouds all around me. Now if I see 5 or 6 in the whole evening, I'm impressed. And my parents' place didn't change. There was no new constructions or anything around. They live near the woods. I live in the country, not far from where I grew up, and I can't get over how the wildlife has changed. We have bugs that we never used to have, ticks, and wildlife that used to be rare is now almost common, moose. But on the whole, it kinda feels like nothing has changed. I know it has. In the city it's a different story. The store that used to be on the outskirts is now surrounded by big box stores, and the downtown area is struggling to keep going. Everybody used to smoke, in elevators, in classrooms, in the library, in restaurants, on airplanes, and just pretty much anywhere. Everybody used to drink a lot more than they do now. Alcohol was an important social lubricant until about maybe 1980. The tacit social dress code was much stricter and rigid. Hemlines might go up or down, but everybody had to conform to that. When mini skirts were in fashion, you didn't dare drop anything, because you would have to show everybody your chinies when you picked it up, and girls had to wear either a dress or a skirt. Nowadays there is great freedom to choose what you wear: short dress, long dress, slacks, jeans, shorts, leggings, and about anything you want. I would have been sent home from school for wearing pants, and boy did your knees get cold in the winter. Grown-ups wore hats. Gloves were part of the feminine outfit when you got all dressed up. I remember wearing them with my Girl Scout uniform on formal Scout occasions. There used to be lots of nuns. Mass was in Latin. Telephones were clunky and had dials on the face of them. Nothing but landlines as far as you could see. Computers were pretty much all at NASA or in science fiction. There were no pantyhose, only gross garter belts and thigh-high stockings. If that sounds sexy to you, you never saw the kind most people wore. Women wore girdles, slips, and stockings. Don't get me started on the primitive arrangements for sanitary monthly necessities. TV was black and white and only had 3 channels. Kids used to play outdoors. There was segregation, which seemed strange, sort of a social mystery. Because why? When I suggested to my parents I might like to be a lawyer, doctor, or police officer, they told me girls couldn't do that. Why? Because that's just the way it is. I was not allowed by my mother to play a French horn in orchestra class because it wasn't ladylike. I was raised to be ladylike. I used to ride my bike or walk all over town, just like Opie. The only rule was be home when the street lights came on. You must be near my age, mid-60s. Everything you describe rings true to my experience. I grew up Methodist, so drinking was highly frowned on, so that was a little different than you. We stayed outdoors playing as a kid. My dad could whistle real loud, and when he whistled we had to get our butts home. Gave us a good 1-block radius to play in. You had better behave when you were out playing because the parents' network would have reported to your mom and dad any bad behavior before you could get home from, for example, committing the horrible sin of screaming a profanity. And bugs. There used to be so many. The June bugs, we would tether to a thread and fly around the yard, until their leg came off. Hundreds of bees in the clover. We learned to be careful when running barefoot. So many differences, some good, some not so good. Hopefully our kids can be better stewards of the earth and get climate change under control. I have worries for my grandkids. This may be different for some, but as a child we were always taught to address our elders with ma'am, sir, Mrs., Mr., etc. If they were a family friend, we would call them Aunt, Uncle 30. Currently, I see more people addressing elders by their names. Not necessarily a bad thing, as it is their names after all, but a change I've noticed. I grew up the same way and always instructed my own kids to not, as a general rule anyway, address adults by their first name. For example, call a friend's mother Mrs. Daniels, not Carla. I know I'm in a minority, but it would always bother me to have my kids' school-age friends call me Brian. But I just kept my mouth shut since that's how they were taught to address people, and my preferred way is probably going the way of the dodo bird anyway. No computers, no internet, no cell phones. Men were not allowed to wear hats indoors. Elders were addressed as Mr., Mrs. or Miss, or Sir/Ma'am, and first names were never allowed because it was disrespectful. Nothing was open on Sunday except for churches. It was family day and always revolved around a huge dinner. Women weren't allowed to wear pants to work. Getting a divorce was taboo and scandalous and looked down upon. You were supposed to stick it out no matter what. The ability to have one parent work, dad of course, while mom stayed home to take care of the house and kids, and you could survive on that one paycheck. Women were not allowed to work when they became pregnant unless they didn't tell anybody they were pregnant, and were able to hide the baby bump. Black kids were forced to sit at the back of the bus and could not use the same water fountains as white kids. They were also forced to sit at the back of the classrooms. The pristine mountain lake where we used to go swimming and fishing has been ruined by development and pollution. Pines and other trees that once surrounded the lake have been eliminated and oversized houses built in their place. As I once described on AskReddit, the formerly pure lake water has been contaminated due to development and toxic gas, oil spills and discharge from motorboat engines. The fish are gone, and the previously peaceful atmosphere is now dominated by the roar of outboard engines. When the average household income was $20,000, my parents bought a $30,000 house and then bragged about how hard it was, how they had no furniture, etc. My first house cost $750,000, night and day. That $30,000 house is less than $200,000 inflation adjusted. Took me years to get this concept through to my parents, who walked uphill through the snow both ways to work, school. It's been kind of remarkable watching people switch from don't trust anything on the internet. Anyone can post literally anything they want to. I saw it on Facebook, so it must be true. Wasn't that long that everyone knew not to give your name or address to strangers on the internet, and not to get into cars with strangers. Now we use the internet to call strangers to our house to give us a ride to the bar. On a related note, people these days are more willing to forgive a boatload more bad behavior from politicians as long as they are upfront and unapologetic about it. Voters are in love with politicians who tell it like it is and saying what no one wants to hear, but being upfront about being a terrible person still makes you a terrible person. People respect the confidence and the audacity more than the actual content. I've had these weird nostalgic moments where the weather feels like it did when I was a kid. Nice summer weather. Generally it's sporadic nowadays, and as we head into another heat wave, it's worth remembering that while we might have had them as kids, it wasn't like this. Heat waves were going from the 80s to the 90s and maybe low 100s, not going from 68 to 95, back to 75, up to 90, down to 70, and then hovering at 90 with no wind for a week. We were talking about this the other day. I live in Northeast Tennessee, and when I was a kid, 90s, we would panic if the temp got up to 100 degrees. Now it's a regular occurrence. The opposite is also true. I worked swing shift, and one night about 3 years ago, it got down to -10 degrees. That was not the wind chill, that was the actual temp. The way the weather swings to the extremes now is ridiculous. We would only see snow accumulation once every 2-3 years. Now it's several times a year. I know most areas will look at these temps and scoff, but 100+ F and 90+ humidity will mess you up. And a -10 F, I was not prepared for this, as most of the time the low is around 20 F. I did not have the proper clothes to be outside working, and that still happens in my neighborhood. Community pool and a basketball hoop in the parking lot, big open grass areas by the pool, constant pickup games of football or basketball. Adults also have zero issue with calling down the neighborhood kids if they get rowdy, cause they are neighborhood kids. Amazing what happens when you give kids something else to do besides cause trouble, with some mild adult supervision. I'm late 20s, and I've been hit with this realization 2 years ago. 15 years ago, in high school, climate change was discussed a lot in our curriculum, though it was our grandchildren will suffer warning. But now, I've got the feeling we're already starting to see people suffering from it. Also, growing up I had the impression we had studied most branches of health, and so we had enough understanding that worrying about contagious diseases sounded like paranoia. 2020 was quite the wake-up call too. I feel like the oncoming environmental catastrophe we're living in right now is going to end up cutting a lot of our lives short. Every problem in it seems to feedback and make it worse, so now that it's already getting bad, it's going to get bad even faster. I'd be surprised if we don't see widespread famines in a decade or two as our agriculture gets hit hard and it's too expensive to do anything about it. I'm about the same age as you. I brought this up to my boomer dad and he told me some very important things. Everything seems like it's getting worse. But things were bad in the past already. During the Cold War, the world could have ended at the push of a button. Many people my dad's age said there was no point making plans. The world was going to end. It didn't. Then there was the fear about overpopulation. People thought there would be mass starvation as we ran out of space on the planet. This didn't happen either, and all of our current modeling shows we'll have enough resources. They thought oil was going to run out and we wouldn't have power. Well, we found more oil, and other methods of generating power. I'm not suggesting complacency, just perspective. If you give up, then everything will truly be over. If we work together, we can solve many problems and have long happy lives. Humanity is very good at solving problems, when we set our mind to it. Just look at this pandemic. 1 year in and they had already developed a vaccine. Incredible work. Also maybe decrease your news and social media intake. They're crushing your mental health. Really depends on the parents and how they raise the kids. My kids get very limited screen time and are fine without screens. My 6-year-old spends most days outside from the time she wakes up until she goes to bed with friends riding bikes, making games up and just being a kid. She comes to eat and that's it. We do have a very safe neighborhood. Luckily I know many aren't as lucky, plus tons of kids on the street. I personally grew up in the 90s with zero limits on screens. I watched TV all day and played my Sega non-stop, plus we got AOL when I was 7, so I used that a lot too. And I have a really hard time entertaining myself without them, so that's why I'm trying to keep my kids off them. The internet and other communications, unquestionably. Electronics generally. When I was a kid, calls to grandma, on the West Coast, we were in Europe, were for Christmas and birthdays only, and were booked in advance, and kept short. If you were unlucky, you got a satellite link with really high latency. Even within the US, you thought hard about whether a call was local or long distance. Your household had one telephone, usually in the entrance hall, wired to the wall. Now I video chat for hours with people in any location without even thinking of the cost, from a powerful mobile computer that fits in my pocket. Cartoons. As someone who grew up with the grim adventures of Billy and Mandy, it definitely wouldn't be approved of in this day and age. Like, it hinted at a porn site and death by firing squad, and that's not even scratching the surface. With cartoons being how they are today, I doubt that anyone would get away with that unless it's hidden well enough to be overlooked by the network it shows on. And with how sensitive people are about things now, I'm positive that if Johnny Bravo were created today, it would cause an absolute riot.